Harsh training methods. Dhutanga Kammatthana monks were motivated by their great enthusiasm for Dhamma. They regularly endured many hardships in their wandering lifestyle, in their living conditions, and in their mode of practice. It was difficult for them to find an excellent teacher like Acariya, a teacher capable of training them in the authentic way, thus bringing joy to their practice. Whenever they met him, they were as excited as small children greeting their parents. The devotion and affection they felt combined to give them a feeling of complete confidence in him. Their lives and well-being were placed solely in his hands. Dhutanga monks naturally tended to have immense faith in their teacher,
revering him so much they would willingly give up their lives for him without regrets.
Even when living apart from him, they continued to feel an extraordinary sense of obligation to their teacher. No matter how much hardship they endured or how difficult their training was, they were contented to persevere so long as their teacher was supportive. They could manage to put up with the deprivations they suffered daily, going without as often as not,
because they were convinced in their hearts that Dhamma was more important than anything else.
There were times when they had to sleep in the pouring rain through the night, shivering like little birds. Still, their determination to endure adversity for the sake of Dhamma never wavered. It was always very interesting to hear Dhutanga monks discuss their experiences of wandering through remote forest areas. The way they practiced, the way they endured. It was pitiable how, due to extreme deprivations, they lived in the forest like wild animals, often sleeping on the ground without shelter. They used a variety of techniques to intensify their meditation, experimenting until they found the ones that best suited their character. They tried going without sleep, reducing the amount of food they ate, fasting entirely for as many days as they could reasonably manage, walking in meditation all night from dusk until dawn, sitting in samadhi for many hours at a stretch, sitting in samadhi all night from dusk to dawn, sitting in samadhi on a trail used by tigers when entering their lair, sitting in samadhi at night on forest trails frequented by tigers, sitting in samadhi in a cemetery on the day a corpse was being cremated, sitting in samadhi at the edge of a precipice, venturing deep into the mountains at night looking for a particularly scary place to sit in samadhi, sitting in samadhi late at night at the foot of a tree in a tiger-infested area, relying on the threat of danger to help the chitta attain calm. These methods were all practiced with the same aim in mind,
to torment the chitta and so forcibly tame its unruly nature.
When a monk discovered that any one or more of these techniques matched his individual temperament, he used it to good effect, focusing his mind and strengthening his resolve, thus achieving his objective and learning many valuable lessons in the process. For this reason, Dhutanga monks actually preferred such harrowing practices. Acariya himself had used them and so liked to encourage his monks to do likewise, insisting that this was the way clever people train themselves. These techniques have never been abandoned. They are still being practiced by Dhutanga monks today. The training we undertake to develop our spiritual worth requires a fair amount of coercion to be successful. The hardships we experience are insignificant when compared with the good results we gain. Virtue, contentment, discipline, and firm Dhamma principles to supervise and maintain our lives, all qualities that people highly value. Only useless junk and cadavers require no maintenance. The personal worth we hope to realize will only arise through conscientious self-improvement, so we should work to maintain this purpose in our lives. By this means, we will be good, happy, prosperous people now and in the future. Dhutanga monks therefore deserve a lot of respect for refusing to allow adversity and hardship to hinder their practice,
thus clearing the way for Dhamma to develop in their hearts.
So long as people are interested in practicing Dhamma properly, the Buddha's sasana will last indefinitely in the world.
The sasana rewards those truly desiring Dhamma who practice accordingly,
giving excellent results at every step along the path. This principle was embodied in the Lord Buddha, who was earnest in his pursuit of truth, a truth that he fully realized and then taught to the world. Those who truly believe in Buddhism
are those who earnestly pursue truth. They never practice in a half-hearted, inept manner,
thus impeding the sasana's progress and devaluing it to the extent that non-Buddhists find cause to be contemptuous. The genuine sasana are the very noble truths that deserve to be proclaimed and accepted throughout the universe without concern about their validity, since they are true natural principles emanating directly from the Buddha's absolute purity. Unless, of course, one is uninterested in truth or unable to understand it.
In that case, the sasana may simply be held hostage within the countless diverse opinions of people whose hearts are totally obscured by a mass of deep-rooted kilesas, a veil of defilements that the sasana has long since thoroughly penetrated.
Please excuse me for this lengthy digression. It shows I lack the firm principles needed to restrain my wayward tendencies. I would like to continue discussing those harsh training methods that Dhutanga monks tended to use until they became second nature. Diligently practiced, each of these methods produces clear-cut results. They help diminish the unruly, arrogant nature of the mind, a condition exacerbated by excessive physical vitality. Reducing the intake of food, fasting, going without sleep, or other harsh methods, such as walking or sitting in meditation continuously for long periods of time, all of these practices provide the heart with the strength required to advance easily on the path of Dhamma. Other practices are designed for those who are scared of tigers or ghosts, which, when practiced unflinchingly,
force the heart to turn inwards where its true sanctuary lies,
remaining there until calm and courage arise. Fears can be alleviated or even banished by such means. The chitta then comes to realize its own strength and ability, so that when it is driven into a corner at a truly crucial juncture, for example, when the body is racked by excruciating pain, it has the means to emerge victorious and survive. Normally, mindfulness and wisdom are fully aroused only when the chitta is placed in a critical situation.
Otherwise, they never have a chance to realize their full potential.
An excellent way to develop the capacity of mindfulness and wisdom to act boldly in full knowledge of their true potential is to use our basic ingenuity, experimenting with various forceful techniques until we find those that best suit us. Our hearts then remain unperturbed, regardless of what happens. Each of these methods brings its own distinct results. Those who have long suffered from fear of ghosts can rid themselves of this debilitating fear by forcing themselves to spend the night in a cemetery. Those who are terrified of wild animals, like tigers, can overcome this fear by forcing themselves to spend the night alone in terrifying wilderness. Those who have persistent craving for food can alleviate it or even overcome it by drastically reducing the amount they eat or by going on fast. We all appreciate good food. We tend to believe that eating a lot of good, tasty food will make us happy. The trouble is, greed never accepts that it's had enough. It always hankers for more. No matter how much discontent it causes us, we fail to consider that the dissatisfaction stems from our tendency to overindulge. So, those of us practicing Dhamma for the sake of understanding ourselves and our attachments must investigate such desires and exercise some forceful restraints on their excesses. In the case of Dhutanga monks, this sometimes takes the form of self-imposed austerities. When a monk notices that a certain type of food kindles an unseemly craving in his heart, he punishes the craving by refusing to eat that food. Instead, he eats things that he feels no desire for. If he feels that he'd like to eat a lot, he eats only a little instead. Or he may eat only plain rice, even though there are plenty of other foods to choose from. Those foods which invigorate the body may hamper his chitta by overwhelming its mental faculties, thus making meditation more difficult. His practice then fails to progress as it should, despite the fact that he is striving with the same intensity as ever. Once he realizes the cause of the problem, he strives to eliminate it by adamantly refusing to follow the greed in his heart. This is the attitude of a monk truly committed to training himself under the guidance of a good teacher. He resists any temptation to follow his usual self-indulgent tendencies. Just as a Dhutanga monk trains himself to be moderate and restrained in what he eats, so too, when he goes to sleep, he determines to awaken at a predetermined time. He doesn't just let sleep take its course, waking him up randomly whenever it so desires. He trains himself to carefully consider the appropriateness of his actions. He resists doing anything that may violate the ethical principles of Dhamma and therefore be inappropriate, even though it may not strictly be in the violation of the disciplinary rules. He strives to inculcate Dhamma within his heart so that it steadily flourishes, never deteriorating, an extremely difficult task. So difficult, in fact,
that no other endeavor can compare with it. When, however, we inculcate the ways of the world in our hearts,
defilements easily arise and flourish, then wait there ready to cause harm whenever we're off guard. We can never manage to bring them under control. In an instant they furtively infiltrate our hearts and multiply until we cannot keep track of them all. We can be sure that they will cause us nothing but trouble. They arise and flourish so quickly that within the blink of an eye they are everywhere, and we are helpless to catch them. Sexual craving is one such defilement, very easy to arise but so difficult to purge. Sexual craving creates a destructive, offensive state of mind that tends to express itself with unrivaled audacity. Because everyone in the world is so fond of it, it becomes emboldened, causing destruction everywhere while ignoring the moral consequences. It does show some fear of people with Dhamma in their hearts, but more than anything else, it is terrified of the Lord Buddha and the Arahants. Since these noble ones have completely demolished its normal playground, sexual craving does not dare enter their hearts to prowl around. But it still creates plenty of trouble for the rest of us who remain under its power. Dhutanga monks are aware that these oppressive kilesas are obstructing their spiritual progress. That's the reason they torture themselves with such arduous training practices. For kilesas are not in the least disconcerted by the fact that monks have ordained into the holy life and wear the yellow robes, the distinctive badge of victory for those who defeat the forces of Mara. They invariably try to convince monks to give up the yellow robes and the spiritual quest they symbolize, refusing to admit defeat regardless of a monk's age or seniority. For this reason, Dhutanga monks feel compelled to use coercive methods in their struggle to eradicate the kilesas from their hearts. They endure and press ahead in spite of the difficulties, battling pain and discomfort but never reversing course. Otherwise, the kilesas will make fun of them as they disgrace themselves and the yellow robes they wear. Even more damaging is the discredit they do to the monkhood, an order of spiritual warriors who never accept defeat, and the sasana, which is the principal basis for all mankind. Better they sacrifice their lives to redeem themselves in the yellow robes than allow themselves to perish in disgrace. In that way, they redeem the monkhood and the religion as well. Dhutanga monks use such exhortations to embolden themselves to strive for victory, thus honoring the Dhamma that someday will undoubtedly lead them to that sublime domain beyond dukkha. Only the Dhamma of the Lord Buddha is capable of showing the way to that sublime transcendence. It is without a doubt the one straight path leading to the land beyond suffering. There is not a more esoteric way that can be taken to avoid the difficulty of putting maximum effort into the practice. Alternative paths are all littered with stumbling blocks that constantly thwart the wayfarer's hopes of success. They inevitably cause pain and frustration,
leading to despair and a lack of confidence that the chosen way will ever lead to a state of total freedom.
Before emerging as a revered teacher of such renown, Acariya practiced with the attitude that cemeteries were irrelevant to him. That is, he was prepared to discard his body wherever he happened to be when he breathed his last breath. He felt no qualms about dying for the sake of Dhamma. Later, when instructing his students, he taught them in a forceful, dynamic fashion that stressed the sharp, incisive tactics he had honed to perfection in his own practice. His teaching was mentally stimulating, helping his students constantly develop new skills to see through the cunning tricks of the kilesas and thus uproot and destroy them once and for all. Only then would they be safely out of danger, living contentedly without dukkha. They would no longer meander through the round of samsara, where one birth changes into another continuously, but the dukkha that is carried around in the heart remains unchanged, regardless of how many times one is reborn. Since each new life is merely a new instrument for one's own destruction, no one should be satisfied with birth in any realm of existence. It is equivalent to a prisoner changing cells within the same prison. As long as he remains imprisoned, there is no fundamental improvement. The wise well understand the dangers of the cycle of repeated birth and death. It's as though with each new birth the heart has moved into yet another house that is on fire. No matter where it's reborn, it can never escape the threat of danger. This is but a small taste of how Acariya routinely taught his Dhutanga disciples.
Perhaps some of my readers will discover an affinity for his style of teaching.
On Uposatha observance days, when as many as 40 to 50 additional monks attended from various locations, Acariya Mun gave discourses on Dhamma that generally differed from those he gave exclusively to the monks who regularly lived with him. Acariya Mun gave discourses on Dhamma that generally differed from those he gave exclusively to the monks who regularly lived with him. Although his Uposatha discourses were often forceful and profound, they could not match the ones given regularly to the monks living in his monastery. Those talks were truly dynamic and penetrating. Each time he spoke, the impact of his Dhamma was so powerful it seemed to dispel the kilesas from the hearts of his listeners, as if the whole world had momentarily vanished from their awareness. What remained was an awareness of the heart united in perfect harmony with Dhamma, an experience so amazing and gratifying it defies description. For days thereafter, the dynamic power of his Dhamma seemed to subdue their kilesas, as though he had issued them all a defiant challenge. Inevitably, their kilesas gradually re-emerged after several days, until they were finally back in full force. By then, another meeting had been scheduled where Acariya Mun subdued them once more, giving the monks a few more days of relief. All Dhutanga monks earnestly striving to reach the Dhamma that transcends dukkha feel an exceptionally strong bond with their teacher. Eradicating the kilesas requires that individual effort be inextricably combined with the help and advice of a good teacher. When confronted with an intractable problem, a monk practicing on his own will hurry back to consult his teacher, who clarifies the nature of the problem, allowing the student to understand its underlying causes, and so overcome his doubts. Sometimes, while a monk is struggling with a problem which is too complex for him to resolve on his own, his teacher unexpectedly explains the solution of that very problem to him, immediately eliminating that obstacle so his student can proceed unhindered. Practicing monks are able to determine the precise levels of Dhamma that their fellows, and even their teacher, have attained by listening to their discussions about meditation practice. This knowledge helps to foster an atmosphere of mutual trust within the circle of practice. When a monk explains the nature of his experiences and the stages he has passed through, from that description it is possible to immediately determine the level of Dhamma he has realized. When a student tells the teacher about his experiences in meditation, or when he asks advice about a specific problem, he can assess his teacher's level of attainment at that time by gauging his responses. If the teacher has passed beyond that point himself, he is already familiar with those experiences, and he is able to use them as a starting point to advise his student on how to proceed. Or, in the case of a specific problem, he is able to pinpoint the nature of the problem in such a precise way that the student accepts his advice without reservation. Perhaps a student deludes himself into thinking he has reached the highest level of Dhamma, having completely transcended the different stages. But the teacher, through his own experience, knows this to be untrue. The teacher must then explain to his student why he is wrong, pointing out exactly where his thinking went astray. Once he is willing to accept the validity of his teacher's reasoning, he can safely avoid such dangers. Once Dhutanga monks have discussed the various aspects of meditation practice among themselves and reached the point where they know and accept the truth of their respective levels of attainment, there is then no need for further confirmation. The principles of truth that have been discussed constitute their own proof. Practicing monks use this knowledge to determine one another's level of Dhamma. From the teacher on down to the junior monks, they all rely on evidence gathered in this way. As for intuitive knowledge of these matters, it requires an inner faculty to which I can lay no claim. I shall leave this matter to those with the appropriate expertise. It is a special case requiring individual skill. The regular conversations on meditation that Acariya Mun held with his disciples enabled them to develop close personal relationships with him. Due to the profound respect this tutelage inspired, they willingly entrusted their lives to his care. This deep faith induced them to unreservedly accept as true whatever he told them, for he always spoke about principles of truth, never presenting mere opinions or guesswork based on information from other sources. I myself have always been someone with strong views, being reluctant to submit to anyone's judgment, so I like to argue with him. In this respect, I admit to being one of Acariya Mun's more annoying and contentious disciples.
Sometimes I was so caught up in disputing an issue with him that I forgot I was a student seeking his guidance.
not a teacher instructing him. I still pride myself on my audacity to speak up, having no sense of misgiving. Although he then slapped me down and chopped me to pieces, the important thing was I was able to learn for myself whether the truth lay in my opinions or in the wisdom of my teacher. When I argued with him, it sounded like a shouting match. The more I pressed my case, the more I realized that he had all the truth on his side. I had only my inane fallacies piled up all around me. I always fought a losing battle. When the dust settled, I thought long and hard about what he said, respectfully accepting its truth with all my heart. At the same time, I made a mental note of my misconceptions. On occasions when I refused to yield to his reasoning, because I still couldn't understand what he was getting at, I would wait for another opportunity to debate with him. But I always came away bruised and battered by the power of his reasoning, my opinions tied in knots. Still, I could not resist smiling to myself, delighted by the mighty power of his Dhamma. Although Acariya Mun realized full well that I was wildly opinionated, he did not scold me or try to force me to change my attitude. Instead, he could not help but smile when looking at me. He may have been thinking how insufferable I was, or he may have felt sorry for this idiot who liked fighting with such die-hard assurance. I must admit, I was never a very fine person. Even today, I still shamelessly argue with senior Acharyas, but it's paid off for me in the sense that I've learned many unusual lessons this way, which form a valuable part of my education to this day. These monks never seem to mind my intrusions. In fact, they are often amused by them. It's not so often that a stubborn old monk drops by to stir things up. Ordinarily, no one dares come and argue with one of these acharyas, so when the monks in his monastery hear what's going on, they become rather puzzled, and more than a little alarmed. After leaving Chiang Mai, where he passed beyond the thick jungle of repeated birth and death, he invariably had a profound reason in mind when he decided to live in any one place for a long time, although he kept these reasons to himself. Nakhon Ratchasima was a case in point. Many monks and lay people there had long developed a true devotion to Dhamma, so many of them came to study with him as accomplished meditators. Later, some followed him to Udon, Thani, and Sagon Nakhon, where they continued to study with him until he died. The monks and laity from Nakhon Ratchasima who kept in contact with him were all well established in meditation practice. Some of those monks have since become famous acharyas who possess a firm basis of Dhamma in their hearts, and are still teaching monks and laity today. Many lay devotees have continued to see steady progress in meditation. Today, they show the way of generosity and spiritual development to other devotees in the area in a truly commendable fashion. He next settled at Udon, Thani, where he spent the rains retreat. Chao Kun Thamachedi, the abbot of Wat Pa Monastery, was an influential monk with a large following of monks and lay supporters. He praised Acariya Mun's preeminence, encouraging them all to make his acquaintance, offer donations, and above all, hear his teaching. Since his ordination, Chao Kun Thamachedi had been a devoted disciple, and Acariya Mun reciprocated by showing unusual kindness and affection toward him, thus his willingness to stay several years in Udon, Thani. Later, after moving to Sokon Nakhon and living at Ban Namon, Acariya Mun met an elderly white-robed nun who ran a small convent in the village. She was a major reason why he remained there as long as he did. Her meditation was exceptionally good. She had developed a firm basis in Dhamma, so Acariya Mun gave her regular instructions on practice. He said it was rare to find someone so accomplished. Acariya Mun's lengthy residence at Ban Nong Pe was prompted by both the significance of the location and the people living in the village. The place was centrally situated in a very broad valley, completely surrounded by mountains, making it an ideal environment for the Dhutanga life. Living in the village was an elderly white-robed laywoman who was approaching 80. Much like the elderly nun at Ban Namon, she was an accomplished meditator who always received special attention from Acariya Mun. She consulted him often, walking with difficulty from her home to the monastery. Shuffling slowly along, supported by a cane, she had to stop for rest 3 or 4 times before she finally arrived at the monastery, exhausted and out of breath. We all truly felt sorry for her. Seeing her struggle so painfully, Acariya Mun would feign disapproval. "Why come all the way out here? Don't you realize how exhausted you are? Even children know when they're tired. Here you are, 80, 90 years old, yet you still don't know when you're worn out. Why do you take all the trouble to come here?" Her reply was always characteristically straightforward and fearless. He then inquired about her meditation and explained various aspects of Dhamma relating to it. Not only had this woman developed a solid foundation for her meditation, she also possessed paracitta vidya, the psychic ability to know the fundamental moral bias of a person's heart. On top of that, she had a knack for perceiving unusual external phenomena. Addressing Acariya Mun, she recounted these extraordinary perceptions with a daring self-assurance that amused him, causing him to laugh about her indomitable spirit. "Your chitta has long since gone beyond," she boldly declared. "I've been aware of your chitta for a long time. It's absolutely without parallel. Since your chitta is already so supreme, why do you continue to meditate?" Acariya Mun laughed. "I will resolutely continue meditating until the day I die. A disciple of the Buddha never allows his resolve to weaken." To this she said, "If you still had more to accomplish, I could understand that. But your heart is already filled by an exceedingly luminous radiance. How can you go further than that with meditation? I look at your chitta and see its radiance encompassing the whole world. Your awareness extends everywhere. Nothing can possibly obstruct its scope. But my own chitta sadly lacks such supreme qualities, which is why I must come to ask your help. Please tell me, how should I practice to attain the same preeminence you have?" Hearing her discussions with Acariya Mun, one sensed that her meditation was truly exceptional. Upon encountering a problem, she inevitably started dragging herself slowly down the path to the monastery, with her cane keeping her company. Acariya Mun was especially kind to her. He made a point of advising her every time she came. On such occasions, the monks would sneak up to listen quietly at one side of the meeting hall where their discussions were held, eager to hear her questions and his answers. Because her questions arose directly from her own experiences in meditation, these exchanges fascinated the monks. Some of her doubts concerned internal matters, focusing on intrinsic noble truths. Other questions related to external affairs and focused on the Deva and Brahma realms. If Acariya Mun accepted her understanding of these matters as being correct, he encouraged her to continue her investigations. But if he did not agree with the course she was pursuing, he advised her to forego that approach, explaining how she should adjust her practice to set it right. Her claims to knowing their minds intrigued the monks, who, though eager to hear her insights, were also rather apprehensive about what they might reveal. But she always described an impressive vision, radiant auras of increasing brilliance, from the young novices on up to Acariya Mun, resembling the night sky array of stars and planets. Some were bright, some less so. It was a majestic sight, for not even the junior monks or young novices had somber, gloomy states of mind. Each being admirable, every monk was worthy of respect in his own way, as he strove to improve and refine himself spiritually. Sometimes she recounted her visits to the Brahmaloka, describing how she saw large numbers of monks, but no lay people. This puzzled her, so she asked Acariya Mun to explain, which he did. "The Brahmaloka is mostly inhabited by people who have already attained the level of anagami. That's why. When a monk who has attained anagami dies, he is reborn in the Brahmaloka. Very few lay people develop themselves to that level, so they rarely gain access to the Brahma realms. Thus you saw only monks there, but no lay people. Another thing, if you're so curious, why didn't you ask one of the monks you saw? Neglecting to ask them while you were there, you now want to come and ask me." She laughed. "I forgot to ask them. I didn't think about it until I'd come back down, so I decided to ask you. If I remember, next time I go up I'll ask those monks." Acariya Mun's explanations usually had a dual purpose, to expound the truth of the matter, and then to clear up her doubts. Later he discouraged her from sending out her awareness to perceive external phenomena, for it used up the valuable time she needed to spend investigating internal phenomena and the basic principles underlying them. investigations leading directly to the realization of Magga and Phala. Obediently, she practiced as he advised. He often praised this woman's meditation practice, telling his monks of her high achievements in Dhamma, a level of success that many of them could not emulate. Her practice, no doubt, was a factor in his decision to live so long at Ban Nong Peo, the longest residence of his monastic life. Also, it was a convenient central location, serving all the practicing monks living and wandering in the surrounding area. Well within walking distance of his monastery were many secluded places suitable for practice. Monks had a choice of staying in wooded lowlands, high mountains, or caves, all being environments conducive to the ascetic way of life. Acariya Mun lived at Ban Nong Peo Monastery for 5 years. Because of his advanced age, he was 75 years old with failing health when he began staying there. He remained within the confines of the monastery all year, unable to wander extensively as he had in the past. He was content to provide sanctuary to all his disciples earnestly seeking Dhamma. While he was living there, the Deva seldom contacted him, tending to visit only on certain special occasions. So he concentrated his efforts on assisting the monks and laity more than he had at other places.